Welcome, everyone, to Four Sacred Gifts podcast. I'm Dr. Anita Sanchez. I'm Nahua, Aztec, and Toltec, and Mexican American. And the purpose of this show, I'm delighted to come to you from Colorado. I'm sitting at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. It's beautiful. I can see out the windows. I'm not trying to make anyone jealous. It's just seeing our plant relatives out here in so full forest. The forest and stuff is so, I feel held all the time. Anyway, and the land here is the land of the first peoples are the Ute, the Cherokee, and the Arapaho. And they are still here. And I say that I know that many of you know, but some people think, oh, they're gone. No, they're here. And I'm a guest here, and I've been a guest here for 50 plus years. My family comes from central Mexico, and that's the Nahuatl people. And so let me tell you a little bit of the purpose of the Four Sacred Gifts. It comes to you, Four Sacred Gifts is from the book, from the Eagle Hoop Prophecy, that Indigenous elders from all over the world came together back in 1904. And Spirit told them that it's time to bring forward the gifts. And so that's what the basis of this show is to have the voices of Indigenous people who have lived in sort of healthy connection with the earth and all the things that they're doing current day, including that is important for us to learn about. And so that's the hope that's actually one of my greatest hopes is that we can share common experiences, but also the unique things that may help you, listeners and viewers, thinking about what am I doing? What's mine to do? Or what are other perspectives? That's really key. So that's enough of that. I'm just really pleased to be here. And my guest is wonderful, Serena Mendizabal. And she'll correct me if it was really messed up the last, but it's a Panamanian name, Mendizabal, and it's beautiful. And Serena and I met, where it was February, I think, Joshua Tree. So she's with the Walking Softer, a foundation that funds 12 young leaders every year and helps them with the impact that they're having to expand that impact, because there are the people they select are doing powerful things, important things all over the world. So with that, let me share. Hi, Serena. Glad you're here. I'm going to just share a little bit of her bio. And Serena is a Cayuga Wolf Clan Panamanian woman from the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. Serena is a community-based researcher, grassroots organizer, and environmental advocate. Serena began her journey in climate justice and clean energy when she was 18, finding gaps in community consent for renewable energy projects, and further explored what climate justice and a just transition can look like in a community of over 28,000. From then on, Serena has dedicated her life to Indigenous self-determination, climate justice, environmental health impacts, and clean energy transitions through studies, work, and extracurriculars. Serena is passionate about self-determined community development, action, and futures led by sovereign, healthy nations. Serena is the managing director of Sacred Earth Solar, and we'll get you how to get a hold of them. We'll write it in there, and we'll also name it before we get off. She's co-chair at 7th Generation National Indigenous Youth Energy Council, Climate Action Strategy co-lead at Protect the Tract, and course collaborator for Connecting the Climate Change Action, as well as board of director at Student Energy. Welcome, Serena. I'm so glad to have you here. I'll put my hand on my head because I'm always amazed and not at the same time how you can be young. I'm glad you're young, by the way, so you have all the years, and have already done so much, have already contributed so much, and I know you have. So we're going to want to get into that. But first, if you could just share a little bit about who you are, where you are, just a little bit of background, and we'll get more into that as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, first, I just want to say a huge nyawgola for the introduction, and also I'm grateful for Walking Softer that they brought us together and our paths have crossed between each other, because I think it's a divine intervention when two amazing people can meet each other, and to have the opportunity to learn from you as well. So, in my culture, we introduce ourselves. We actually have six different languages in our confederacy, but Scano, Serena Gawaso, Guy Kononio Quenzoda, Ochinige Shouta. So that was with Mkuga. And basically, so my name is Serena. I'm Cuba Wolf Clan. And as mentioned by Anita, I am from the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, which is where I'm calling from today. It's beautiful and sunny. Yesterday it was very windy. My gutter actually fell down on my house. So that res infrastructure, I can feel that. I feel like a lot of people can probably relate. And yeah, my communities, I've grown up on this territory my whole life. I grew up in Brantford, the neighboring town beside Six Nations, still on the Grand River, and then moved to Six Nations with my partner, who is from the Northwest Territories, which is a story for a different day of how we met. But yeah, my whole life has been surrounded by the Grand River, where the only community in so-called Canada that has all six of our nations. And so, for some viewers who may not know, the Cayuga people come from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is our confederacy of our six different nations: the Mohawks, Senecas, Onondagas, Cayugas, Oneidas, and Tuscaroras. And we all came together under the Great Law of Peace, which is basically our constitution, and it is all recorded within our wampum, our agreements we've made among each other. And through facing genocide, through facing many trials and tribulations that our people have, being some of the first people in contact with settlers. We originally were based in New York State, still, though our beaver hunting grounds was much larger, which spanned across the so-called borders and north of the Medicine Line. And through there was an eviction notice for our people during the American Revolution, and to exterminate our people. And so we fled through this, what is considered the Sullivan Campaign today. And our people, it's basically a Haudenosaunee diaspora, are all over both sides of the border. You can find us in New York State, Ontario, Quebec, Wisconsin. So we're all over the place. And Six Nations is really special to me because it's the one place where all our nations are together still. And so we're still able to really push forward our governance in a way that not many other communities in Canada outside of the Haudenosaunee have the ability to do, because we've held on so deeply to our clan system. And so when I say I'm Wolf Clan, I'm really proud because that comes through my matrilineal line, and that's passed down through the woman in my family. And it actually, our family title is Johogo, which is on my finger right here. You can kind of see that's our family title. And I always am like, I'm not giving you the finger whenever I show that. But it means it touches the sky. And so when the peacemaker came in the story of the Great Law, the peacemaker found our family, and we were already smoking tobacco in the pipe. So the message of peace was already brought. We were already doing that before the Great Law came together. And so that it touches the sky really resembles the tobacco smoke going up. And so it's the fact that I have that knowledge passed down through not only my family, but people in my community and at our longhouses and in our confederacy who really care about maintaining our culture. I'm incredibly grateful for, and I wouldn't be doing this work without them. But that's just a little piece. Six Nations is a big community. We have 28,000 members. We're the most populous community in Canada. And we're extremely surrounded by urbanization, industrialization. We are in this hub only an hour from Toronto and all different cities around us. And we're currently on lands called the Haldimand Tract, which was through Sir Frederick Haldimand. It was granted to us because we allied with the British during the American Revolution. and that land that we would have 6 miles each side of the river for our prosperity, which I wouldn't be doing this work if that agreement was still held to this day. But we have maintained our positioning through the Haldeman Proclamation and our positioning on these lands, and really through the relationship we have to the lands. And so, yeah, that's that. I can get in a little bit more later, but through a lot of this work of supporting our presence on the tract, as well as within our beaver hunting grounds, has really informed why I do this work today.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I feel like, well, gosh, we have lots to learn from you. And it just makes my heart sing when we say 28,000 people, the Six Nations still together, because you don't see that. It's very difficult. And so just a quick question about, so this agreement with the Brits during the Revolution, is that now in whatever you call your Canadian Constitution, or is there actually law there so that protects you?
So this is a really interesting question because a lot of people will say it's a treaty, but it's actually not a treaty agreement, which a lot of the many, if you look at Canada, we have the numbered treaties that were created much later. This comes from 1783 or 4. I should know that. And it was a proclamation. So I think if we think about the royal proclamation, it's in the same presence of on the same equivalent to the royal proclamation. So it was never actually enabled within Canadian legislation. And I think this is why we're still in a land conflict for hundreds of years now, because it's never been considered a treaty. It's not necessarily a constitution, but it's a proclamation. And I think the other thing too for Canada is Canada really likes to recognize modern day treaties, which is like the number treaties, which is what they still work within. But for the Haldeman Proclamation, they would, even though it's not a treaty, they would constitute it under historical treaties, which then brings up a whole mess within that context, because it really shows title has always been to Indigenous peoples. And I've heard from actually I've heard from Dr. Pam Palmater when we had our last land conflict in 2020, and we can get into some of these different land conflicts we've seen, but that if the Canadian government or the Crown, because the proclamation is from the Crown, but if they were ever to repay us, give us the land back, or give reparations, it would be trillions of dollars through the Haldeman Tract, because it spans, I'm pretty sure the Grand River spans 300 kilometers. It's from Elora to the Lake Erie. So the mouth is at Lake Erie. So we're also surrounded by Great Lakes. And because of all that urbanization near us, the land, the amount of tax money the government's made off these lands, the amount of money they've made off development and corporate interest is extremely high. And so when I think about that as well, I think they probably don't want to settle because we've been in a 20 plus year land claim. They don't want to settle because they can't afford it. And the only thing that truly would be able to repair this relationship is if our community got the land back, which I don't think is in the interest of the Canadian government at this point.
Well, thank you, because there's some similarity and difference, because in the United States, the Indigenous nations are in the Constitution, those that are recognized, because it gets complex because we have some federally recognized and then unrecognized. So that's another way of dividing us. But nonetheless, but still, even when you're in the Constitution, it's so clear. I hear about the struggle because there's challenge, and when we're talking about all this, I want to have the viewers and listeners say, no, when Indigenous people are living on the land, it is a relationship, and you hear Serena talk about this land. It's a part of her. It's more than just a place. It is relative. It is so critical, and yet regardless of what kind of legal, there's still this under siege. But here's the other part I just want to let people know. One of the ways in which you can support Indigenous people wherever they are around the world, and they have different rules and laws and treaties and no treaties and all those kinds of things, is to understand and support them when they go to protect land and rivers. Because you need to understand they're protecting that because it's their culture, it's the land that they grew there, they have a relationship with. But when we do that, it also is protecting you because you drink the water. This land, we need the trees, we need all these things. So I just want to say that because when you were talking, I was just so coming through like, okay, folks, this is really critical, what she's talking about. And I didn't mean to cut you off. It looked like you were about to add something too.
No, just so with the Haldeman Proclamation, because it's like exactly what you're saying. With the Haldeman Proclamation, that is our right to the land through the Canadian government. But I will say Indigenous people such as ourselves who are constituted as First Nations, through the Indian Act of 1876, it was basically an act of legislation for Indians and lands reserved for Indians. So, and it has basically been the pinnacle of colonization for our peoples across this country. Very much focused on First Nations, but now the government constitutes First Nations, Inuit, and Métis as Indigenous peoples in the country. And with the Indian Act, it gave us status cards. So we're actually tracked all through the government of who constitutes Indian as Indian, really focused on blood quantum in that point. It was what put us on the reserve system. So we're in these parcels of land and we actually couldn't leave the res when my ditto was younger because she would have to enfranchise at that point. It was what would take your status away. You would no longer be constituted as Indian if you married someone non-Indigenous. We didn't have the right to vote. We didn't have the right to do our ceremonies and our culture. So it's funny because this act recognized us, but it also took all our rights away as Indigenous peoples. And so with that being said, there's been this of movements across liberal governments wanting to abolish the Indian Act. Oh, it's very racist. But if we were to abolish it at this point, it would also abolish our unique rights that we hold within this country. So yeah, it's interesting because it's basically a generalization of all of our peoples, but then we have our own context between our lands and what is constituted as our lands. And so ours would be very much based on the Haldeman Proclamation and why it hasn't been settled, because I've heard it's quite the case compared to other people who have more clear-cut treaties. Then it's the ability to enact treaty rights is much easier. And I would say in the Constitution, they also recognize 3 different rights now, which was Aboriginal right, which is inherent rights that flow from the land and your relationship to it, treaty rights, so rights that flow from treaty, and then one that just came through the Delgamute case, which is part of the Wet'suwet'en and Salish peoples out British Columbia, was recognizing Aboriginal title, which was a huge feat. They ended up, I believe, losing the case, but the big feat from that case was that Aboriginal title was now recognized in the Constitution, which is basically the title that we've always been on these lands. We hold relationship to these lands. The lands govern us, we govern them, and that relationship surpasses settlers arriving here. So yeah, very interesting context that we've been dealing with in Canada. Definitely very different than the United States. And Haudenosaunee people actually have treaty in the United States with the government. So it's much easier to navigate things. And I won't speak for them because I don't live there, but I know just our context is a whole lot different because we're not necessarily recognized in the same way when it comes to our lands.
Right, exactly. Well, it's not really getting off of it, but I know that a couple of things you said, and I want to get into what it is you're focused on and doing and all of that we can learn from. But you said something that I know people are going to pick up on because we're, of course, many of the people who listen in care about the earth and they care about us, respect between people, and they're wanting to learn more. And you talked about peace, the unique peace agreement between the 6 nations. and how that has held for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about more, since we need peace really badly? Let's hear how you all have managed that and continue to have that foundational.
Yeah. So yeah, the Great Law of Peace, I don't know when they say it actually happened, definitely hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And we're actually told the Great Law of Peace. I've been told this story since I was younger. And it's funny because it's basically like we story tell our constitution, which I think is so beautiful and exactly who we are as a people. And I've heard it numerous times. We hold a recital every day. But the Great Law of Peace basically comes from when we were in a really dark time with our people. There was lots of conflict. We were fighting among each other. And we had the peacemaker come. And the peacemaker wanted to bring peace among our people. And so it's this beautiful story interwoven of how the peacemaker goes to every nation and every family and all the different stories that come among that. And we always laugh because the Mohawks, they make Peacemaker go to test Peacemaker. They make him go up the tree and go up and hold on to the tree. And they're just basically like laughing and making fun and razzing him, which is very Mohawk, I would say. But in shorter terms, it basically brought us all together. And when we came to the White Pine Tree, after Peacemaker went and visited all these families, and we put our weapons down underneath the tree and we settled and decided to bring unity among our people, and that we would form our confederacy, which you can see here is a emblem, and it's actually a wampum of our Hiawatha belt, and it's how our nations came together. And there's another wampum that actually shows all 50 families. And I really, when I think about that, it's just that presence of how our families are still here. And that to me is the great peace. And I think how we maintain the peace, it comes into how we maintain our families. And I think that was a really big thing with the Indian Act, because I didn't mention this, but the Indian Act also created residential schools. My Nanny Lou is a residential school survivor, and many other people in our community and across the country have residential school survivors as grandparents or as parents or are ones themselves, as well as day school. And I think when it came, because the Mush Hole, the Mohawk Institute, is the longest running residential school in the country. And it's just 15 minutes from our house. I have drove by it every day of my life, pretty much. And with our people, and I think about the great peace, and I think about how that great peace is rooted in our families and our care for each other. And as well as the great peace comes from the land itself and our relationship to the land, and it's all very interconnected, because as people, as we do ceremony, our ceremonies are come from the land. And that's why we say the land governs us instead of we govern the land, like many settler colonial institutions. And I think with the residential schools, they knew how powerful our families were, that our families were the way and reason we governed ourselves, because we governed ourselves through our families. And so when residential schools came, they had two missions, basically to disrupt our families and to disrupt our relationships to the land. But how we've maintained that is through our culture, is through our relationship to land, and is through our families, which is, to me, all one and the same. Because when we conduct ceremony, it is based on our seasons, based on our natural world. And so all that informs all of our ceremonies. And then we take part through our clan system is how we also conduct our ceremonies. But when I come into ceremony, I'm Wolf Clan, and that is my family. And so it's all very interconnected of how our governance rules. And this is basically, that's the premise of our governance. And so that's how we've kept it, is there is many people in our community. Well, many were being taken to residential school, were being taken into day school. Many of our people kept that culture still going, even if they had to underground, and kept our languages. Like many people's great grandparents and grandparents are language speakers still. And we've seen a pause maybe in my mom's generation and my grandma's generation of not necessarily having our language, but there has been so many people who have kept it, and the amount of young people in our community who are still speaking our language and who are learning it, such as my younger brother. He's currently in Mohawk immersion. And to me, everything is rooted back in our language. And so that's how we've kept it, is because we've kept our languages. And we definitely, our languages are endangered, but we have so much work going beyond that. And so I think how we've kept the peace among our people. And I will say it's not perfect. And in history, it hasn't been perfect, because when we had that diaspora, our council made the decision to close our fire. And so in our confederacy, how it works is Onondaga is the fire keeper. So we call it the fire. And they made that decision that every Haudenosaunee person could make the decision themselves of what they want to do: stay in the States, side with the French, side with the British. And they closed our fire. And I think that was the best decision they could have made at the time that they thought for us. But I also think that has been because we didn't end the Great Peace, but we kind of closed it for a bit. That has had ramifications. And I think us not being united and us not being one, and bringing our minds together as one, is what has impacted some of these further impacts in the future. But I'd still say it's because many people have kept our culture and our ceremonies, and that's what keeps peace, and it comes back to our families.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that, because what it sounds like at the very micro level, all the way into the macro of you as nations together, one, that gives some insight into powerful work that needs to happen all over the world. And that as you're talking, it makes me think about, from the inside out, from the outside in. And so how you're able to do what you do is because you continually are working on the inside, and the smaller family, and then that family gets bigger, and then combining with others. And that's what it takes. And it sounds like, when I hear you talk, is that there's also lots of communication there, and maybe that got disrupted, as you talked about, during that time with letting the fire go. So that's another critical piece, because I know we're kind of in a time where people are just so afraid or angry, and it's just the separation so big. So I feel like we have a lot to learn from your nations, and I'm hoping people will go in even more into that. I want to, if you're anything else you want to add on that before I'm going to talk about what you're doing. Yeah.
So no, that sounds wonderful.
Okay. So, I think people will want to know, how did you get into doing what you're doing? And then they're going to want to know some of the things you said, just transition, basic solar, and tell us about that. But maybe a little bit about your journey, how you got to this, and then what it is you're doing as the managing director. And so I'll be quiet and let you share with us.
Yeah, no. And so giving that context that I just spoke about, that's where I come from, and that's my people. And there's so much more I could share. But it's really informed the positioning of my family and where I've gone. And so I like to say, when it comes to this work, my story started before I was even born. And I think about my parents. And so my mom is Cugall Wolf Clan from Six Nations. My grandma's from here. She's Cugall Wolf Clan, and my grandpa's Mohawk Wolf Clan. And then my dad is from Panama, and his family's from El Valle to Antone, so in the valley, near the mountains. And it's always interesting. Everyone's like, how did they meet? And they actually met due to colonization, racism, all the different aspects. We have a lot of houseless people. And so my parents, through their own journeys of growing up in probably very toxic environment, having to deal with a lot of the issues that we still deal with today, but I would say I'm privileged to not have to deal with the same things that my grandparents and my parents deal with. They actually met in Toronto, and they were both homeless young people, and they met at a homeless youth shelter called Horizons. And so they met when they were very young. And when they ended up having me, conceiving me, they decided, okay, we want our daughter to come home and we want her to grow up with her family and grow up with her community. And so through all the tumultuous avenues that they've had to take to, one, survive on the daily, but two, to try and make a healthy, safe home for me. They found themselves back here on our territory so that I would be with my family and community. And so I grew up in very low income. And I think within that sense, I always felt not angry at the world, but maybe a little bit of not understanding why these things were why these things were the way they were. But there was always something that never settled with me, right? And I think it was just seeing the own treatment of my family from the state. My dad has faced police violence, and it was all of these different things that I didn't necessarily know. I think at such a young age why this was happening. And it really, when I was 8 years old, we had a land conflict in my community. So this is in '06, and I was born in 1998. So I'm 26 years old. So it'll be 20 years since our land conflict called Gunestado, and it's considered the protected place. And it was a huge conflict in our land conflict in our community because the developers that are in the nearby communities, they wanted to develop a mass housing development called the Douglas Creek Estates, which was literally right on what we would consider our res, what people would consider the border. It was still our land. It all is our land. And our community was like, no, this isn't happening. It was one of, in time, the longest standoff between Indigenous peoples and the state in history. And my own family was on the front lines within that. And we still see the implications of having to deal with that kind of conflict on our mental health, on emotional health, on spiritual health today in our family. And so it was like I grew up in the backdrop of this major land conflict, and it gave me some insight to why things are the way they are at 8 years old. But I think in a lot of my head, it all just felt like police violence, and I couldn't necessarily make the large connections at 8 years old why our people were being treated this way in regards to just wanting to protect our lands and protect our home, which is it's really as simple as that too. So 8-year-old me, it was very clear, but I think we make everything a whole lot more convoluted, and so. A big thing that came out of that too was I think a lot of young people felt like their voices weren't necessarily included within this conflict, because in a lot of the mediations, and my grandma was actually a mediator between our community, so the Confederacy, the band, the OPP, Ontario, all of these different parties. And she's actually never come back to our community since because of how much harm and uh, harm and difficulty that the situation caused. But yeah, with the not knowing that youth voices weren't included, my mom was really part of trying to make sure our young people were included after that. And so I started organizing when I was like 9 years old in the community around a lot of youth organizing and making sure that young people in our community were prioritized within a lot of these different situations that we were facing, that we had space to gather, that we had access to ceremony, that our opinions were valued within decision making. And so it felt, I think, for all of the harm that I was seeing growing up, it felt like an avenue of things can be different and an avenue of hope. And so from that young age, I carried that spirit of of the fact that we have the ability to make change in our communities and in the world. And I think I'm really grateful that I was my mom's little sidekick coming everywhere, that she brought me everywhere, because it's informed my own organizing to this day, 20 years later. And so that's always stayed with me, a lot of that work. And then eventually I went off to school and I was going in for journalism. And at first, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to speak around the harms of everything going on. I wanted to bring our stories to the forefront. I thought it's really important, and that work is incredibly important. But then one summer, I needed a summer job. And so I came back home to the community and I worked at the Six Nations Development Corporation. And it was a development corporation that basically was created post Ontario, our province's phase out of coal, because we were very coal heavy. And just 30 minutes from my community, we had the Nanacoke coal power plant, which was one of the highest emitters of GHG emissions in the country and created severe health implications for many surrounding communities. And so the Ontario government wanted to phase this out, not only as this climate emitting project and plant, but also as we were seeing the health implications all across the country. Toronto was covered in smog during that time. People didn't even want to be outside. And so our community felt, okay, we haven't been included in these conversations with these previous energy sources. How do we, through this phase out, use it to the best of our ability to create a branch of self-determination within the energy field? And so from there, they created the Development Corporation. It came out of a 2011 report of what the community wanted, which was to separate business and politics. And from there, also that main focus that many of our investments in energy sources would be clean energy because it would align with community values. And so it sounded really great to me. I was super excited. I was 18 years old. I said, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to make our community healthy. It makes sense. We're unhealthy right now. This is why many of the things are happening to us. And also the systems around us have taken away our self-determination. And so I felt like this was an avenue of all these different, that would tackle all of these different issues that we were facing. And then I got in the job. And exactly. And I was working in communications. So I focused specifically on community engagement, consultations, and education with our renewable energy projects. And there was a big project called the Niagara Reinforcement Line, which was basically a transmission line that cuts through a major part of our territory all through Ontario. And it would transmit 800 megawatts of clean energy. And this would be a recommissioning project. So it had been decommissioned, the community had not wanted it. Then they wanted to recommission again because it would help with surplus clean energy on the grid. There was not many consultations. I would say, and I think we're all trying to work the best we can within these fields, but I don't know if we knew, or if the organization I worked for really knew the magnitude of what this project could do and the magnitude of community engagement and consultation we actually needed to create consensual projects and not replicate the same harms as the fossil fuel industry. And so with that being said, limited community engagements happened and many of the community members actually decided to occupy the space. And that came out. I remember it being clear as day. It was very hectic and it was very divisive in that point. And seeing that many community members didn't want this project, this recommissioning of the transmission line, because it was cutting right through territory that would be used for planting, that had medicines, that was part of our Carolinian forest, all concerns that were extremely valid. And instead of listening to these concerns, our development corporation and the band and Ontario went to the courts and got an injunction on the space in which the transmission line, and basically an injunction basically limits your ability to access space. And if you are to access that space, then you would be criminalized. So at this point, they put the injunction forth and said, if you are going to continue protesting, which I find always interesting because I feel like our people aren't protesting, they're just voicing their concerns, you would be arrested. And the project ended up moving forward because of this injunction in place. And so little me in this role, seeing what is unraveling in my community, thinking, oh, this is supposed to be really amazing and provide so much agency and hope and make us healthier. It was actually the same. It was doing the opposite. And it was harming our people, harming our access to land, and making us unhealthy for the pure fact that there was the potential to be criminalized. So basically, how I got into this work was that didn't feel right to me. And as a young person, I remembered what it was like just 10 years prior when I was 8 years old with the conflict. And it felt they were doing the exact same thing that the Ontario government was doing, and that we were replicating these same harms and we were creating consensual development. And so how I got into this work is we have this transition. Six Nations actually has the largest clean energy portfolio of any country or any First Nation in the country. And many people praise us all over the country. But I looked and I said, is my community proud? And they're not even involved. Half the people don't even know about these projects. And so we can get this critical appraise from everyone else, but what really matters is our own people, and our own people didn't want it. And so for me, I really came into this work from an environmental perspective, and then furthered into climate as well. But really, my core focus is industry is impacting our health. Industry is impacting our access to land. Industry is creating environmental degradation. And what we really need to focus on is climate change is only happening because of environmental devastation from industry. And so we have to take a step back when we talk about climate change and see that there's critical root causes that are creating this. And when it comes to clean energy, we aren't necessarily going to take away the impacts that are still facing communities with the environment, the environmental impacts. We might lower GHG emissions, but are we going to provide consent and self-determination? Is it going to provide healing? And is it going to make us well? And that was all these thoughts at 18 years old that I knew then I had an obligation to, yes, we need to transition as fast as we can because we are seeing the impacts of climate change firsthand. But at whose impact, and what is the measure of success with this, and who is benefiting from this? Because it doesn't feel like our people. And so that's how I got into the work. And it was when I was 18, I'll be 27 this year. So it's around 9 years of doing specifically just transition work, where we're really focusing on a justice framework within the transition, because right now we're not seeing that across Canada. And we're just seeing business as usual and profit over people when it comes to these clean energy projects. And I also think that we need to look at environmental impact and health impacts when issuing solutions. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into this work. And the last 9 years have been a whole different story of what I've been up to since.
Well, go ahead and tell us, because this is fascinating to see. Let me just say, I love it. I hear it more from younger people, but even older people do it. Is like, there's a problem. Let's go at it. Rather than, oh yeah, we tried, it doesn't work. It's just like when your heart is so clear, love is under this, feels like sacred activism, love activism, that you move forward. And in a way that only you as young people do. And so we need to support. But go ahead and say what in the last 9 years then with this.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Anita. I appreciate that. Yeah. So the 9 years have been interesting, of what I've been got up to. I did graduate from my master's. I did it with a focus in Indigenous health and environment, how pulp and paper and wind turbines are impacting communities' health out on the East Coast with Tobique First Nation and Pictou Landing First Nation, which I think completely grounded me in the idea of this interconnection between our health and the lands around us. And it basically is something we've already known as Ungwehue, as Indigenous peoples. It's something innate in who we are. But I think what was really interesting coming out of the masters was that the numbers also backed up what we were saying. And the numbers were a language that governments, corporations can also speak. And so having to learn how to speak in their language as well. And also that this is really tied to our emotions when our lands and our health are impacted. It's extremely traumatizing for a lot of us, and it can create emotions. So we can be really upset, and a lot of people like to ignore if we're visibly upset about things. But when there's numbers behind it, you can be as emotional as you want because the numbers are also speaking the truth. And so that's really, I went into my master's after leaving the dev corp because I wanted to figure out, okay, is economic development is supporting us becoming healthier? Is renewable energy supporting us becoming healthier? We are seeing in certain instances, renewable energy is making us healthier. We're also seeing industry such as the pulp and paper mill is making us unhealthy, and it's also impacting our self-determination. And so this context really drew me into, okay, I know the impacts. I see the impacts. I've studied the impacts. Our communities experience them. What are the solutions? And I want to work on solutions. And as a young person, I feel this obligation to work on solutions that are informed by a justice framework and are ones for liberation, and also self-determination is at the core. Because at the end of the day, with the Development Corporation, it was tied to the Band Council, which was tied to the Indian Act, which I mentioned. And when I talk about our confederacy, we are our own traditional hereditary governance system. And so how are we doing things in a different way? And so that's where I actually found myself at Sacred Earth Solar, where I'm the managing director. And Sacred Earth Solar is an Indigenous woman-led nonprofit organization. We were very grassroots. We're kind of growing at this point, that supports Indigenous communities in advancing a just transition away from colonial extractivism. And I like the use of colonial extractivism and not just fossil fuels, because it also shows that a lot of these low emitting energy sources and a lot of these renewable energy sources still require extraction, which is the exploitation of our Mother Earth. And so Sacred Earth Solar, really the roots of where it comes from is the Alberta tar sands, where our founder had faced one of the largest oil spills in the country. And she wanted to find another avenue of energy resources in her community. So it really comes out of that impact as well that we're trying to eliminate. And then further, as Sacred Earth has grown, it's really focused on supporting frontline land defenders and the movements of those people who are actively protecting their territories. We've worked with the Wet'suwet'en, who have been occupying and working against the Coastal GasLink pipeline, a fracking pipeline. We have worked with the Tiny House Warriors, who have worked against the Trans Mountain pipeline, which was bought by the Canadian government and became a crown corporation. Has also been subsidized $34.2 billion. We have supported Fairy Creek blockade, which is against old growth logging out on Vancouver Island. And it is the largest act of civil disobedience in Canadian history. We've also supported healing spaces and art studios, because we also know that is the front line as well to maintain our culture. But with all of these different areas, we have provided solar so that they can sustain their movements, that they can be safe, comfortable, they can charge their phones, their laptops, which are so needed when you're in a frontline situation. And Sacred Earth really was important to me, and I wanted to do this work because in 2020, so many years after the land occupation in 2006, we had another land occupation and land conflict, which is called 1492 Land Back Lane. And so all at the same time, I was figuring out what I wanted to do. And going with Sacred Earth and seeing the different avenues, my own people were experiencing the same state harm and state impacts that many other communities across the country were feeling. And with 1492 Landback Lane, it was again a mass housing development just across the street from Gunestado, the protected place, which was the land conflict 14 years prior. And so 50 people were arrested. Many people actively for months and months, if not years, were working towards protecting that land. There is a permanent injunction on that land, but nothing has happened because we are still there. And so during my master's, during figuring out my role within Sacred Earth, I came home because I was away for school, and I came home when that happened. And I knew this is exactly what I want to do. I want to work with my people. I want to protect our lands. I want to support these movements because I know we're actually doing the work that is making a difference, because Oil Change International and had made a report. It's called Indigenous Resistance Against Carbon. And they did over a 10-year span. They looked at they quantified the metric tons of emissions that Indigenous land defenders had stopped or delayed. And it was 1/4 of annual Canada and US emissions that Indigenous peoples had stopped or delayed. So it's very significant. And it shows right in the numbers again, our people know what we're doing. And we wouldn't be doing this, one, if we didn't think that this was going to make a difference, but two, we also are doing this for our own health and well-being, and we know our health is reliant on the land. And so seeing what was going on in my own community and being a part of what was going on in my own community, that's where it really locked down that Sacred Earth is doing the good work. We're supporting grassroots, community-led, hereditary system-led movements. And that was the work I wanted to do, was to bring solar energy, low emitting clean energy sources, but to do it in a right way, to do it coming from the ground up instead of developers coming into our community and getting the Indigenous participation check mark. And so a lot of this work is what I've been focusing on, and I'm managing director at Sacred Earth. So I get to work on a lot of amazing projects. I get to do education and trainings. We work on a lot of advocacy and policy. We also focus on healing justice, because healing justice is climate justice. And with the work in my community, I have been that climate action co-lead for Protect the Tract. So in 2021, our Confederacy put a moratorium on development, that no development can happen without the consent of our hereditary governance. And I've been with Protect the Tract since we launched as an organization, and this is based in 6 nations, and really have focused on this understanding that our Confederacy and our governance system is our inherent right and is the rightful title holders to our lands and to our people, that we have the right to engage in our own governance systems. And so I was working at Sacred Earth Solar, and I was doing this work with Protect the Tract in my community. And I thought, what would be amazing is if I could bring the work Sacred Earth Solar was doing and bring it back to my community. And so since 2022, I've been working at my family's longhouse, the Sour Springs Longhouse, with our hereditary governance. So our chiefs, our clan mothers, our faith keepers, our young people, our elders, families, to implement a sustainable restoration project, which would basically focus on solar PV, energy efficient retrofits, and a seed storage facility. And it is to be governed by our people, so outside of the Indian Act Band Council or the Development Corporation, but coming from our great law, coming from our constitution as Haudenosaunee people, our hereditary system that connects us to the great law, and it's honestly been one of the most full circle, amazing moments of my life. And knowing that Sacred Earth, this is the real work that we do, and the fact that I can bring the capacity we hold as this grassroots org who supports frontlines, who supports hereditary groups, and I can bring that back to my community and do the good work in my community. And so Yeah, it's been quite the amazing project. We got many people in our community, about 15 in the longhouse, trained in solar installation and solar operations and maintenance. So not only were we implementing the projects, but we were building capacity and hopefully career pathways for our people. We did many engagements. We did it all so people would bring it back to their families in their clans and communicate. Because, as my one friend said, Courtney, she said the best community engagement process is our clan system. So that's how we did it. And we did it right. And in August of last year, we implemented the first portion of the project. We put up a 24 kilowatt hybrid solar PV nanogrid system, and so it's powering all four buildings on the longhouse. And just for some background on the longhouse, many people like to say Haudenosaunee is a translation of people of the longhouse, but it's just what we used to live in before. And the longhouse is basically our place of governance, ceremony, harvest, and funerals, and so much more. We have language learning there. It's our community space. It really brings us together. But yes, it's our place of governance and ceremony, which is very important and vital to who we are as Haudenosaunee people. So what was any better than going to the longhouse and building these solutions for a space that really represented who we were? And so with that solar project, it now will cover all four buildings on the longhouse. We'll put retrofits too in there as well, because we believe energy efficiency, just using less, is really important. Instead of just putting as much energy projects as possible, let's reduce the amount we're using. And with the retrofits, with the retrofits and the solar, we will see a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which is not the purpose of the project, but it is amazing that this is also an outcome. And then the last part that we're currently working on, we were just having more meetings this week, is building a seed storage this summer, because our seeds are everything to who we are as Haudenosaunee. We're agricultural people. We love our corn. I think we're one of the most northern people who plant corn still. So I love we're probably connected in that way, Anita. And we love our beans and our squash and our sunflowers. And so really our ceremonies and our culture are dependent on our seeds. And so there was no other pathway I wanted to take but supporting our relationship to the land and our relationship to our seeds, and building a centralized space at the longhouse to store our seeds so that we can catalog, sort, grade, and store all of our seeds so that we can leave something behind for the next generations. And so it's been quite an amazing project. And the solar went online fully in November, and we got our first energy bill that has no payment for the electricity. And it's honestly, when we put up that solar project, it was one of the best days of my life. And it felt like I had 100% found the journey I was supposed to be on. And that feeling that I had in my community, I want everyone to have that feeling. And so with Sacred Earth, we work with other people to implement projects. We want other people to implement community-led projects. That's why we're sharing knowledge. In Brazil, how I mentioned I was in Brazil a couple of weeks, we were sharing how to build projects with 200 people from around the world, because we want this. And I looked at them when I was presenting and sharing our knowledge. I said, I want you all to have this feeling of gratitude and excitement and care and love. Because exactly what you're saying, Anita, everything comes back to love. And I'm just so grateful to be able to do this work in my community, to be able to work with Sacred Earth, to work at Protect the Track that are enforcing our inherent rights. And I wouldn't be here without my family and my community. So yeah, really grateful. And thank you so much for letting me share a little bit about my story.
Yeah, no, that's so great. And as we're closing down our time and conversation, I'm just thinking, whoa, your story, all the things, so many people are trying to figure out, what is mine to do with it? And you're laying out your whole journey. It's all about the connection. So I could feel your ancestors smiling, that, clear to the renewable energy, but really doing it a way that is of the people, of the earth, and not just masking. And then the seeds, I thought, oh, yeah, so you're planting seeds, but you're saving seeds for the future. And I think that's one of the major things that we need. And I want to just say, as I hear these stories all over the world, and they have their own flavor and specific things, just as yours does. But what I come to understand even more fully, when we hear the numbers that 82% of the most biodiverse lands left on this earth are lands that Indigenous people are on, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And it's not surprising. If you are part of the land is part of you. If you're part of the water is part of you. If you're working from your values and you care about not only yourself, but the community, and it gets larger and larger, and the future community, then we're going to be in great shape. And so I just want to thank you so much for coming. And I want for you to say where other people can find what you're doing and find out how to support you, learn from you, whatever. And I have down sacredearth.solar is one way. Anything else you want to tell me about how to contact you, or how people could be of support?
Yes, no, for sure. So exactly. First things first, I just want to say thank you so much, Anita. Your words are really full of gratitude. I'm very full of gratitude for you. But yes, I think that's the big thing, is this connection and building relationships. And so feel free to reach out to me. One of the ways is the website at sacredearth.solar. You can message in, and our info at sacredearth.solar will receive any messages. You can also follow us on Instagram at Sacred Earth Solar. You can also follow the Instagram Protect the Tract, so you can see the work actually happening in Six Nations of my community. And then Sacred Earth, you'll see a lot of the different projects we're doing across the country. And yeah, feel free to email me. I'm JT at sacredearth.solar. We're always looking for support with collaborations, partnerships. If you have background in clean energy implementation, want to donate some equipment or different things to the communities we're working with, very much open. And yeah, I think a big thing too is right now with the current EOs and the different context of attacks on environmental NGOs, a lot of funders are pulling out of projects and funding these critical projects like our Sour Springs one. And so not only just for my project, but I just support everyone, if you can donate and support fundraising in different Indigenous environmental organizations, both in Canada and the US, such as Indigenous Environmental Network, Indigenous Climate Action, and Sacred Earth Solar. I highly recommend supporting through funds. So yeah, thank you so much.
And save this earth. And I'm filled with gratitude for Mother Earth and for you and for your relatives. And just thank you so much. I look forward to the next time we get to talk. Hopefully we'll be together face to face again. That would be really wonderful. And I want to thank all of you who are watching and listening. And please come back. Every month you can come and hear from an elder. And as you can tell, we have elders rising. It doesn't have to do with age. Some of them are coming in really young. And then we have the older, we have all the different things. And this is a way for you to really support the people who are making a difference, who are living values and doing the best we can. And, but we need all of us because we're all relatives. And with that, I just want to thank you and have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you again soon.
Yaga.